not start the stream. So just please bear with me. This is something that it's not exactly. This is something that may work. This is something that may not work. So just bear with me, because that's. We'll see if it ended up sending a separate stream out. Yep, okay, so for those who are on YouTube, there is a separate stream. So there is a new YouTube link for it. For those who are on Facebook and those who are on our other platforms, things have worked completely fine. Obviously, something has gone wrong in the stream. If you're watching on there, obviously, yeah, I've managed to resurrect a new YouTube link for it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's joys of trying to do things on the fly and live. Yeah, or the other one is stick with our or watch it on our Twitch channels. That's the other alternative that gets around the YouTube one, while YouTube can line itself back up and all that sort of thing there. Okay, we will restart Chris Pent's speech. God, this is going to be well, actually, I'm not sure if it'll be a mess for editing. We will figure that out, but we'll restart Chris Pent's speech from the start to sit there and get things going from here.
Chris Pent. Madam Speaker, I move that the building and construction sector self-certification by plumbers and drainlayers amendment bill be now read a first time. I nominate the Transport and Infrastructure Committee to consider the bill. At the appropriate time, I intend to move that the bill be reported to the House by 19 March 2026. I really do, Madam Speaker. And further to that, I wish to point out, Madam Speaker, as others have commented in the context of the bill that the Parliament has just considered and helpfully passed, and at least by way of first reading, that this bill forms part of the same reform package to make it easier, faster and more affordable to build by reducing the burden on building consent authorities and moving responsibility to construction sector professionals. This bill will make substantive changes across 2 acts to improve the efficiency of the building consenting system and make better use of regulatory resources. The bill will free up building consent authorities and shift responsibility to professionals, Madam Speaker, as I have pointed out. And it's worth starting by noting that the consenting system at the moment can be slow and inefficient, causing delays and increasing the cost to build in New Zealand. Inefficiencies are caused by risk-averse behaviour and lack of capacity for building consent authorities, and a system that discourages professionals from taking responsibility for assurance. The risk aversion is understandable, Madam Speaker, but nevertheless we need to understand from a systems point of view the effect of these incentives and think if there's a way that we can make it possible for greater responsibility and thereby having greater quality as well as faster processes. So to that end, this bill introduces an opt-ins scheme allowing approved plumbers and drainlayers to self-certify that their work complies with the building consent without the need for a building consent authority inspection. This will save time and money for professionals and building consent authorities, which I'll from here on in refer to as BCAs, mostly being councils, and homeowners. The scheme will be integrated into the existing consent system. Plumbing and drain laying work will still need to be consented as usual, but a declaration will be filed that the plumbing or drain laying work will be self-certified. Inspections will not be carried out, allowing the professionals simply to get on with their work. Once the work is completed, the self-certifier will issue a certificate of compliance which confirms that their work complies with the building consent. BCAs will be required to rely on the certificate as legal assurance when issuing a code compliance certificate at the end of the building process and will be protected from liability for self-certified work. Instead, the responsibility will lie with the professionals doing the work. The scheme will likely apply to the majority of plumbing and drain laying work in standalone residential buildings, meaning that there is a massive opportunity to remove inefficiencies in the consenting system and make it faster and cheaper to build homes in New Zealand. It will also free up BCAs to focus on riskier work that should be inspected. Madam Speaker, a key tenet of the legislation is that the bill promotes efficiency without compromising safety. That's because safeguards will ensure that efficiency gains are balanced against ensuring safety. Only plumbing and drain laying work that meets the definition in regulations will be able to be self-certified. The bill limits this definition to work that is routine for experienced plumbers and drain layers and presents a low risk to public safety. Riskier work will still need to be inspected, providing protection for homeowners. To self-certify, professionals must meet robust standards, demonstrating the necessary skills and experience. These standards will be set by the Plumbers, Gasfitters and Drainlayers Board through Gazette notices and will be based around technical competency, experience, ability to meet their new liabilities and their administrative practices like quality assurance or QA. These minimum standards will also give consumers confidence that self-certifiers have the right skills to meet their new responsibilities and will protect the public from defective work and the harm it can cause. In practice, I expect that most plumbers and drainlayers who hold the highest licence class will be eligible to self-certify. Endorsed professionals will be able to self-certify work that they've done themselves and work that they have supervised. This reflects the reality that the most experienced plumbers and drainlayers often work in a supervisory role. The bill also introduces new functions for the Plumbers, Gasfitters and Drainlayers Board, which will provide a further level of consumer protection. Certificates of compliance will need to be lodged with the board to be held on a register, parts of which will be publicly accessible so future homeowners, insurers or other interested parties will be able to see if a property had self-certified work. This will make the scheme more transparent and professionals more accountable. Failure to lodge a certificate will be a disciplinary offence, carrying a maximum fine of $10,000, one of a number of changes to the board's disciplinary functions. The bill also extends existing offences to cover self-certification and raises some existing penalties, promoting responsibility and accountability. The bill gives new monitoring powers to the board, including the power to audit certificates of compliance. This will ensure that the work complied with the consent and the building code. Tradespeople who do poor or non-compliant work will be caught and held to account. This is our crackdown on cowboys that we're fond of talking about, Madam Speaker, and I say that with all due respect to real cowboys, obviously, and cowgirls. The bill will have a staged commencement, Madam Speaker. Something to celebrate, indeed. Most of the bill will commence on the 30th of June 2026, but provisions relating to powers to make secondary legislation, the functions of the board and other official bodies and other transitional provisions will commence on the day after royal assent. This is to provide time for the necessary operational requirements for the scheme to be developed. I commend this bill to the House.
I don't know what to think on that one. So, great tools we have here with DeepSeek has sat there and brought up this. So let's move over to DeepSeek, and it gives us a bit of a summary of what the arguments are for. So the best arguments for the bill is the efficiency and reducing costs. Proponents argue the current consent system is slow, inefficient and risk-averse, causing delays, increasing building costs. This bill would free up building consent authorities, usually councils, from routine inspections, allowing them to focus on riskier work and let professionals get on job faster. Some people can sit there and say that because I'll tell you right now, your building inspector probably isn't necessarily a builder. They might be someone with no experience, so that does true. Aligning with other trades, it highlights the common sense and fairness factors for plumbers and drainlayers to self-certify work, just as electricians and gasers can do. Yes, that is correct. They currently can do that. The argument is that experienced licensed professionals are the best place to know to judge their own work. Well, someone else's licensed experience probably is better as a second person, but I understand that logic. The bill establishes a robust opt-in scheme with high standards to set plumbers, gasfitters and drainlayer boards, ensuring to do that. And the bill introduced new monitoring and auditing systems, power boards, a public register of self-certified work, and increased penalties for non-compliance. This can crack down on cowboys. DIY, I mean, here's Jason's comment on there. Cowboys, cashies, they're coming for you. Good. Worst arguments for the bill is the simplification in anecdotes. Some arguments rely heavily on simple slogans, less red tape, but people's anecdotes are about frustrating about inspectors without engaging in the complex times of consumer protection. Example is Cameron Luxon's story about being a 30-year veteran waiting for an office inspector. And the assumptions of perfect implementation, arguments in favour often assume the safeguards, board standards, audits and regulations will be perfectly designed without critically examining potential gaps. And that's the thing is, the best people will sit there, you won't have a problem there. The worst people will end up sitting down there and basically ruin it all. And these are some of the negative, the best arguments against the bill. Inadequate consumer protection pathways, shifting liability onto the individual tradesman does not by itself create a reliable way for homeowners to get that. Well, especially considering if, say, a homeowner has sat down there and actually, if a builder has ever gone bust by bankruptcy or something like that, indemnity insurance probably needs to be something that solves that problem. Risks to individual tradesmen over companies, critics point out liability falls on the individual endorsed profession, not the company. This leaves the little guy exposed for employers' failure of companies. A Phoenix company, which is a known problem in the sector that the government has not yet addressed. So that's I don't know about it for building ones, but I do know that you can do that when you've want to exploit workers. And that's part of the reason for the Crime Theft Amendment Bill, when that came in, was to put the liability on the director, or the punishment on the director, not to the company, because you can just shut down your first company and set up a second one. Oh, you've got a clean record. Well, you've got a dodgy person behind it as the director. And historical precedents of failures, which will be the leaky buildings crisis, rushed through processes in unclear scope, and some of the worst elements, guilt by association, political grandstanding, and heretical fear-mongering without evidence. So that's a bit on there. So let's get on to Arena Williams for her speech. Oh, sorry. Thanks for that, Jason. That's a good point. I forgot to do that. So yes, you're watching me actually read all of that. Sorry, let's kick back off with Arena Williams starting with his speech.
Sector self-certification by Plumbers and Drainlayers Amendment Bill. This is a good one. This is an exciting one for Labor to be able to support. I'm going to raise some questions with it, but we are looking forward to getting into this with the people who it matters most to, the plumbers who want to make sure that this is sticky legislation, that we get this right, and that we don't touch the rules again, because we need to make sure that this is something that both the professionals in the sector and the people who rely on it, the consumers, can have faith in for the long term. And that's why this needs to be cross-partisan. I hope we can work together in the committee, ably chaired by Andy Foster, to make sure this works. We do have a few reservations, and I'm going to run through them. But yeah, we're happy to support this at first reading, and the key for the Labor Party is that we'll be looking for strong consumer protections and robust safeguards throughout the change that professionals will be faced with here. Because we share that goal that everyone wants more affordable building, and we want to ensure that speed doesn't come at the cost of safety or quality or the rights of consumers in this process, the mums and dads who are just trying to build a home affordably and cheaply in New Zealand. Because cutting costs is good, but cutting corners, Madam Speaker, is not. Plumbers and drainlayers already carry quite heavy professional responsibilities, and if we are shifting here in this bill further liability from, say, BCAs onto individuals, we must also ensure that these standards are very clear, and that there's access to the appropriate insurance products and proper support for those regulators who are tasked with ensuring that the system is working. The industry at Select Committee will rightly ask us, why is liability being put on these individuals and not on, say, the businesses themselves? It's important that we understand here what's being asked of these professionals who haven't had this sort of liability before, and whether the appropriate legal person, in this case natural person, is being regulated here, or whether it's appropriate for the business to be regulated instead. And why is it that businesses aren't being regulated under this? Well, simply, Madam Speaker, I would suggest to you that it's because the program of work that the government has long advertised around Phoenix companies and around companies in the building and construction sector going under or going out of business and then popping up perhaps the next day, perhaps 6 months later, in a new corporate form, is a practice that we must stamp out, because it really impacts on those consumers. But that hasn't been done yet, and it does not look like the government will progress that. That's a problem if you then have the little guy, the new plumber, done his apprenticeship, got his qualifications, now suddenly faced with liability for his large employer that is, that he would reasonably expect was being managed within a corporate setting and a corporate structure. That doesn't seem right or fair to me, to the little guy here. We also want to think about when councils reduce oversight, consumers must still have sensible and simple, reliable pathways to get defects fixed. And the natural policy response to this, Mr. Speaker, would be insurance, either a compulsory insurance scheme or a state-backed insurance scheme. Schemes like the ones that Australian consumers have enjoyed for many years, they work pretty well in their markets. There's a range of them to choose from a big gold-plated consumer-friendly scheme in Queensland to the slim-lined schemes in, say, New South Wales. We have none of that, and yet we are building a policy response as if there is an insurance product in the market that does not exist already. And so we need to make sure that that risk spreading is going to be able to happen for also these plumbers. When we think about the little guy, we need to make sure he's got access to something that will help him when things go wrong for him, as well as the consumers who he's working for. The only other question I'd add in my last minute is to make it clear that we should be thinking about the scope of this work. When I think of, say, the corner bakeries in the electorate of Manariwa, the best bakeries in the country, I think, why don't they also, the best bakeries in the country, Mr. Meager, I think about making sure that they have access to a sensible and quick regime where standard plumbing in their shops can also be covered by what is a quick and efficient regime. We should be asking the questions about who is in scope here, because that would make sense to me. Finally, just on the report back date. What a Grinch this minister is for not letting the plumbers, the hard-working New Zealanders who want to have a say on this, not submit in the full time frame they're being forced to over Christmas. We want our plumbers out plumbing. Go fix up some kitchens. Go work hard as you are doing. Don't have to come back to select committee, but unfortunately that is what they are being faced with here.
I find that quite funny about the Grinch who sits down there and stealing, the plumbers and drainlayers Christmases. So that's a very good point Arena Williams is bringing up on there. And let's continue on with my local MP, Julian Genter.
The Honourable Julian Genter.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. Tēnā koutou te whare. As I outlined in my earlier speech, the Green Party is not supporting this bill at first reading. And we absolutely understand what it's aiming to achieve, but the truth is that New Zealand is lagging so far behind other developed countries in terms of having a level of accountability and oversight over building and construction work that we need to do a whole lot of other things before we make it easier before we start reducing oversight and accountability of professionals. And I mean, it's very difficult to trust this government when so many of the steps that they've taken are actively making things worse for consumers, for residents and citizens. And I think just some of the recent changes they've made, they can't seem to differentiate between good, effective government regulation that lifts productivity and protects people. That's the purpose of government, is to protect and empower people. And when we don't have those systems in place, people get screwed over. And I was talking to a constituent in my electorate not that long ago who just really wanted to tell me about the experience he'd had with purchasing his first home at the top of the market, going to do some basic works which he had planned on and budgeted for, and finding out there was a whole lot of very serious structural problems with the building, which was only about 20 years old. And these are due to deficiencies in our building techniques. He has no one to go to. The people who did the building work, long gone. There's like no record or accountability of it. He's got a very large mortgage. Interest rates had gone up because he happened to buy at the top of the market. And a young person, trying to get his first home and not. Yeah, so I wouldn't say thanks National, because the guy's in serious financial difficulties now because he found out that the building had serious problems with it, which now he has to spend a whole lot of money to, and he did get building inspection done, but when it was the top of the market, he was, people are under a lot of pressure because it's a seller's market, and so people who are trying to buy start lowering their standards and have less money to get the work done. So this is the whole problem. It's that's the point. That's what this government doesn't understand, is that government is here to protect and empower people, and we work together to do that. That's what a democracy is for, and we do it because it works, because we're all better off when we work together to get better outcomes. But for several decades, we've had a race to the bottom in New Zealand of successive governments who have cut really important rules, regulations, investment and funding to different parts of the public system, which led to the leaky building crisis. And that cost local councils billions of dollars. It was hugely costly to enable those changes and reduce oversight. And at the time, Treasury was just like, oh, they'll sort it out in the courts. Well, actually, that's a very theoretical position, because when people can wind up their business and declare bankruptcy, but then pop up somewhere else and not be held to account, that's a problem. And ultimately, it is the public that picks up the cost one way or the other. So, look, I'm all for better regulation. In my observation, in both the building sector and urban planning, there's a whole lot of regulations that are doing the exact opposite of what we need them to do. But just getting rid of it and trying to speed up or simplify the process without actually lifting performance and accountability and investing in oversight means there's a real chance of problems down the road that will end up costing us all. And so I think there's very, very good and clear reasons to not oppose this, to not support this bill at first reading. We will see what the select committee process turns up. But with the fast track process, it's a perfect example of how the government, and with the changes to the clean car standards, which are going to be rushed through in urgency later this week, it's a perfect example of government doing what's good for business or for corporates when it's actually bad for the country. It's bad for consumers. It's bad for households. It's going to cost us more in the long run. It's bad for the environment because they don't care. They clearly don't care. I mean, they've made it very clear. They don't care at all. If it's good for the donors, if it's good for the big lobbyists, if it's good for the overseas interests, they're all for it.
Cameron Luxton.
Great point about mentioning the fact that businesses can just liquidate and then set themselves up again. I mean, I'll tell you this right now, being here limited, that has never happened. But it is interesting the fact that that is true. There are some businesses, that's the standard way they function. If you sit there and type in some people's names into the company's office, you'll find probably 10 struck off or deregistered companies. And each of them seem to have quite short duration times rather than long duration times. So yeah, it's that is something that is a bit of a concern, is how the liability part is, and that's possibly where you need things like possibly in certain professions. Now, I do know this happens with the medical profession and the legal profession, as there is a bit of a personal liability that is attached to it. That you fully don't get the benefits of limited liability, particularly if you personally screw up. But there are some things such as if your physical practice goes bankrupt, there are things in there, and that's possibly where the better one is. But possibly is what was mentioned from Arena earlier was we possibly need to have a government-backed insurer that sits down there and actually lays down the foundations for such a system to take shape. Otherwise, we could just have a system like Canterbury Earthquake, where basically the whole insurance system just goes completely bust and having to sit down there and have the government step in and inform, was it a company called Southern Response, which we know is not always necessarily has had the best reputation. Let's continue this time with Cameron Luxton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise once again as an LBP speaking on a bill that addresses real issues in the construction sector. Mr. Speaker, currently if a sparky or a gas fitter wants to sign off some work and say, hey, it's behind a wall, I don't want to hold up the progress of this building, it's perfectly sound, I can certify it myself, that's allowed. But a plumber running pipes or a drain layer running drains cannot do the same thing. Mr. Speaker, it makes no sense. I've been on building sites where there's been massive holes in the ground waiting for someone in a high-vis from the council to turn up and tell us, don't worry, you can fill in that perfectly good hole. I've only been, this is as an inspector speaking, I've been in the industry 2 years, but you 30-year veteran of the drain laying profession, you cannot be trusted to make sure that your pipes are going into the sumps, into the septics, and into the soak pits that you have been doing for decades. Mr. Speaker, this is addressing a real problem that holds up sites. It's not a huge thing, but it's a greatly important thing. Along with allowing a new LBP scheme to do with internal waterproofing, that'll deal with the waterproofing issues that might come up from such a from allowing people to assess their work. But with drains and pipes, this is not complicated stuff. These professionals know what they're doing when they've been trained. They can do it. They're licensed. Let them at it.
I wonder what he would like to sit there and have for, say, evidence or documentation things on there. I mean, I can understand electrical wire with the jib going out there. However, we do have the technology now where you could take a photograph of that and submit that into the things that a building inspector could sit down there and look at a later date, or have that as a foundational document that can sit in there. I mean, Now, this is a little bit of a story on what happens with somewhat self-certification or shortcutting. So back in the 1970s, there was a building of a road known as Terrace Tunnel. Now, I'll just bring up a picture of the Terrace Tunnel here. Tunnel Wellington. So let's bring it. So, well, where is it? Basically, if we sit there and go through here, as you can sit there and see there, that's the Terrace Tunnel. So that is, anyone who lives in Wellington will sit there and know that tunnel off the back of their hands. I mean, if you want to see a night version of it, whatsoever. Back in the 1970s, when it came to doing the case is still now, it's just the fact that the technology to do it is a lot better. So if you had an X-ray machine back in the 70s, the X-ray machines used to be, a good example would be a size of a small car like a Corolla or something like that. And you had to go through X-ray weld and inspect it. So if you sit there and go, X-ray weld, we'll see what that basically, if you can sit there and go through there, that sits down there and looks at, basically X-rays weld. It looks to make sure that there's no cracks in the weld, that sort of thing there. It's basically a very standard feature of safety techniques to do with tunnels. Now, what happened in the Terrace Tunnel is there was something like 400 or 500, possibly 600 welds that needed to be X-rayed. And what happened was the original technician or the people doing the X-raying were only X-rayed about 150 of them, and they duplicated the slides from 150 onwards with the same slide. Stupid thing that they did. Now, Dad sat there and said if they swapped around, there probably was nothing actually integrally wrong with it. But what happened as a result of that that shortcut was that one of the safety inspectors ordered all welds to be ground off and re-welded and re-X-rayed because because only a quarter of the X-rays were done. Now, I think they should have gone through and actually possibly just re-X-rayed them. That probably was a better idea. I don't know, but also maybe the X-raying part gets done is possibly not long after weld. I don't know that particular process when it comes to doing the X-rays for welds. But I can also tell you right now, if you go to the dentist and you see those X-ray machines, that's the sort of size you'll be having to do the job now. And trust me, they're a hell of a lot easier to sit down there and get into places around for testing of things like, to make sure things are structurally sound. So what would have been a job that possibly could take a week can now be done in a day sort of thing, or even quicker. And I'm pretty sure they do with safety inspections now, because every year the Terrace Tunnel goes through a warrant of fitness safety inspection where the road is closed every night for at least a week overnight, and they go through and do all those things. And I think one of the things they do check is the structural integrity of the tunnel, the welds, and all that sort of thing that goes with it. So, they definitely do a lot of work on that one. And I mean, that's just one tunnel that's had controversy at the start of when it was built. So that sort of thing there is like, if we've got ways that we can say, you can do this, do the certification part of the formatting of it, but can be later checked up to be inspected, say, a